Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gumshoe Stories, a series that takes a deep dive into the Missy Bevers case. My name is Tim Koval, and I got some great things to talk about today. Police have finally broken their silence on the Missy Bevers case, giving an update on the investigation. That's the big news, and we'll talk about that, but we also are going to talk about a couple of other things. I'm going to talk about Randy Bevers again, because some people just won't let that go. And then also going to take a look at the untargeted aspect or theory of motive in the Missy Bevers case, and whether something like burglary is just out of the realm of possibility in this case, or perhaps something that we should look at. So we're going to talk about that, but first just want to say again my little caveat that I always start out with, which is if you're new to the case, don't start with this episode. Go back to episode 1 of Gumshoe Stories and start there. Go to my channel, go to my website, gumshoestories.com. Read my overview of the case that's in the blog section on my website. Read the 5 or so, or listen to the 5 or so podcasts that precede this one, and you'll be up to date, because we're going to assume in this podcast that everyone is pretty much up to speed on the basics of the case. So with that said, let's get to a discussion of the breaking news of the day, which is that a radio station, let's see, it's a Dallas area radio station. Let me look again at what their call sign is. KRLD, a news AM station in the Dallas area, actually had an update with Scott Brown, who is the Assistant Chief of Police in Midlothian now. And he told them that a new resource has been brought into the Missy Bevers case in the form of a retired federal agent. He said the new investigator has this case on his plate as well as a couple of other cases, and that this investigator is going back to the start and reviewing everything that has been done, seeing if, and this is a direct quote from Scott Brown, seeing if a fresh set of eyes can help bring this thing home. He said that they still get around 10 to 15 tips per week about the case. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. First of all, this is the first update from police in a year and 7 months. Missy, as we know, was murdered in 2016 in April, and along the way at the yearly anniversaries, police at first did an update like clockwork on the 1-year anniversary, on the 2-year anniversary, on the 3-year anniversary. Then they assigned a new investigator to the case to lead it, and that was, at the time, was Sergeant Andy Vaughn. Then the 4-year anniversary came and went, and police had no acknowledgement, no public press release, nothing with the media. They just were completely silent about the whole case. And that was in April of this year that the anniversary went by, and they really had not said anything since April of the previous year, of 2019. So it's been strange. It's been strange that it came and went in April. I know we were beginning to deal with a pandemic and everything, but that should not have affected them giving us some kind of an update, even if it was only to say, we're working on it, we've got some irons in the fire, this is not a cold case, we're still getting leads, and we are pursuing this, and we will continue to pursue it until Missy's killer is caught. They could have said something like that, but they didn't. So, and it's been, another 7 months since then, since April. And we finally have this update. Assistant Police Chief Scott Brown was the one who gave that update. He's in the position now that former Assistant Police Chief Kevin Johnson was in for much of the investigation, the first 3 years or so before he left the department and retired to go do other things and pursue other opportunities. So the Assistant Police Chief is kind of the police spokesman who talks to the media. Scott Brown was not with the department when Missy was murdered, so he's come in since then. Don't know if he came in as assistant police chief or if he's been promoted since coming, but that is his position now, assistant police chief of the Midlothian Police Department. And so Scott Brown, we have to thank for giving this update to that radio station, KRLD. And I found it interesting that that he talked about this retired federal agent and referred to him as a fresh set of eyes. If you followed this case from the beginning, you know that when Andy Vaughn was named lead investigator, you had multiple headlines from multiple media sources that all used that same phrase, a fresh set of eyes, which it's hard to imagine that being a fresh set of eyes when it's Andy Vaughn. He was there from the beginning. He was already in the department. He was already working on that investigation. So to name him the head of investigation that he's already been involved with is hardly a fresh set of eyes, in my opinion. But now it's being used again, and I think much more appropriately, because it's a fresh set of eyes in the form of a retired federal agent who was not involved in the case and does not work for the Midlothian Police Department, and so he's basically coming in as a consultant. And so that is a fresh set of eyes in my estimation. I don't know if he's FBI. They referred to him in the piece on the radio station site as a Fed. So I'm assuming that he's FBI, but I don't know that for sure. And yeah, let's hope that something comes of it. He's going to take a look at the case from the beginning and try to bring this thing home, is what Scott Brown said. And I think that this new investigator is a different investigator than what we heard in the last year or so about a retired police chief who was brought in to take a look at the case, and whose actions and efforts there have led to them pursuing some additional persons of interest that they weren't pursuing before. And so I think that, if I understand it correctly, they've brought in a consultant who's the retired police chief from another jurisdiction, but who was not a federal agent. He was a local police chief who had retired. And now they've brought in a federal agent who's retired as a consultant. And we also know that they transferred in two officers, or two detectives, I should say, from another local jurisdiction, another department, within the past year or so, who have solid homicide investigation experience and who are working this case actively and working it pretty hard from what I can tell. So you see that there's a lot of resources that are being brought to bear in this case, and that is nothing but good news. And it shows the commitment of the Midlothian Police Department to try to make headway in this case. So I applaud their efforts in that, with these two investigators in the Criminal Investigative Division, who are actual Midlothian Police Department employees who are working the case as detectives, and then one and I believe two consultants brought in from the outside to see what they see and see if anything has been missed, maybe take another look at particular persons of interest a little bit more closely and see where that leads. So that's where that stands, and I hope that it's going to pay off. It's just good to see that there was an update at all, and it's good to see that they are working it and not afraid to invest in resources. And you know, these consultants that they bring in, they don't work for free. Just because they're retired from whatever they did before, that doesn't mean they come in and work for free. They're coming in as consultants and probably making more, per hour, if you break it down per hour, than what they made in their original careers. That's just kind of how it works when you bring in consultants. So Midlothian's not afraid to put some investment into this, and that's good to know. Okay, and I will put in the description of this podcast, I'll put in the description a link to that radio station broadcast It's kind of a news broadcast that's 9 or 10 minutes long that covers other things, but you'll have to go to the 8-minute and 12-second mark to hear the part about Missy Bevers. So I will put that in the description and you all can hear that for yourself. Okay, so on to the second thing that I wanted to talk about, which was just briefly another discussion about Randy Bevers. I'm kind of tired of talking about that angle, and some of you may be as well. But look, there are a lot of people who have seen footage of Randy Bevers walking, and they think that Randy Bevers walks exactly like the suspect that's seen on the church video. And they're entitled to that opinion, and I understand why they think that, and I'm respectful of that. But I just want to recap again the things that work against that theory. Okay, number one, Randy Bevers is probably too tall to be the suspect. Randy Bevers is not as tall as his son, but he's still taller than what police have said, which barefoot height is probably about 5'6". Okay, if you take the helmet off and the shoes and everything else, just the person standing barefoot is somewhere around 5'6", maybe even a little bit shorter. And I say that because police said that from the floor to the top of the helmet with the gear on, the suspect is 5'8", plus or minus an inch and a half. So you know that the helmet and the shoes add height. Maybe as much as 3 inches, 3.5 inches, somewhere around there. So this person, if you take those things away and he's just barefoot, around 5'6" or less. And that's on the short side. And Randy Bevers, like I said, is not as tall as Brandon, but I don't think you can say that he's 5'6" either. So that's one thing. Another thing, and this is huge, is he's been confirmed to have been in California at the time of the murder. And some people will still argue about that. Was he really confirmed to be in California? Well, we only have what police have told us to go on. And you have to figure police did their homework here. They said they talked to people. They said that they examined electronic records. And that he was in California, in Oceanside, California. He and his wife were traveling by RV. There are photographs of them on a golf course from Sunday. To be able to drive is out of the question from California to Texas. To be able to fly from California to Texas would leave a trail that police would be able to uncover. So that's another reason that it's not Randy Bevers. A third reason, and this came out in a recent television documentary episode about the case, in which Randy's son Brandon said that his father had a degenerative condition. It started in his 20s, where the vertebrae in his neck begin to fuse together, so that he loses his motion, his range of motion, to be able to turn his head, to be able to tilt his head, to make him hunched over. It started in his 20s, and the man is probably in his, late 60s, mid to late 60s or something like that. So we're talking about 40 years or so of a degenerative condition to where he can't tilt his head up. And Brandon himself pointed to the video, the church video, that shows the suspect at that split door, or we call it a Dutch door, where he opens up the door and only the bottom part comes open. So then he kind of tilts his head back like, oh, well, this door's not one door, it's two doors. That tilting of the head motion is something that Brandon says Randy cannot do. And when you see Randy in the footage that we have of him from the dry cleaners fiasco in front of the police station, he does have that hunched over look. You even see him when someone's to his left that says something to him, and he kind of turns. You see it's an awkward turn. And it reminds me a lot of, there was a South Carolina governor many years ago. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was the governor of South Carolina who had fusion of vertebrae in his neck. I don't know that they fused naturally or if it was something where he actually had to have a doctor or a surgeon go in and fuse them together, but he absolutely could not turn his head to the side or up and down. He just had to move his whole body. And so I was reminded of that when I went back and looked at Randy and the footage of him at the police station. And so that's yet another reason that it can't be Randy. And some of you are going to say, well, Brandon's, of course, is going to defend his dad. And, somebody pointed out to me that, was it Jeffrey Dahmer, that his father tried to defend him and said that he had a degenerative knee condition that would have kept him from killing people, blah, blah, blah. And they try to compare that to Brandon defending his father. Well, for one thing, a degenerative knee condition of Jeffrey Dahmer is not going to keep him from killing and eating people. It's just not. It may affect his mobility if somebody tries to run from him, but it's not going to keep him from killing people. But on the other hand, with Randy, we're talking about something that we can see in video footage and compare it to something that the suspect does, and it really does not appear that he can do in his range of motion what that suspect did. Now, I did have someone on my YouTube channel kind of dispute that and say, well, the suspect in the church video didn't really tilt their head. It was more of a tilting of the body back. And maybe that's true. I'm not going to dispute that 100%. So, sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on with that footage because it's so bad. The church video, low quality and resolution. So they may have a point there, but even without that, we still have the alibi of being in California. We still have the height. We also have that I think he's a little bit too pudgy to be the person in the church video, because that person in the church video is not as heavy set as a lot of people think. For number one, they've got a lot of bulky clothing on. They've got layers of clothing, including a heavy tactical vest. For another, that camera angle is from 8 feet up, I believe, 7 to 8 feet up from the floor. So it's looking down. And an angle that looks down on an object in camera, if you look into film and the nature of photography and cameras, if a camera angle is pointed down, it makes the subject look thinner than they really are. I'm sorry, stockier than they really are by maybe 10%. So you look at that suspect, and they are actually around 10% or more thinner than the camera is making them out to be. And that's on top of the fact that the clothing is very loose-fitting and layered and thick. So that person is not heavy set in my estimation. In my opinion, I think that is a person of average build. And Randy is a little bit stocky. He has a belly. That's another reason why it's not Randy. And let me say this in closing about Randy. We just really have very little footage to go on with the Missy Bevers case to be able to compare the suspect to the way one individual walks or another individual. We've really only got two individuals to look at, right? We've got Randy and we've got Bobby Henry. And both of them walk duck-footed, or with, they say, pronation, where the feet are turned outward. And since that's all that we have to go on, there's the tendency, the temptation for people to say, well, of course it's Bobby Henry, or of course it's Randy Bevers, because they walk just like the suspect, exactly like the suspect. The number of times I've read that in comments on YouTube videos, in news articles, it's just over and over. So let me point out something. I'm not an expert on gait. I'm not an expert on feet. I'm not a podiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. And 99% of you listening to this, you're not either, unless you happen to have been trained in those areas. Physical therapy being another one. Someone who's advanced in anatomy and maybe sports injuries and the effects of injuries on the way people walk. Those people in those categories can look at a walk and they can see so much more. They can see fine detail that we as amateurs cannot. To us, if you're comparing walk, what are you really comparing? I mean, you're looking at the feet. Are the feet pointed straight north? Or are they pointed to the side? Are they pointed inward? That's really all that we can do in terms of our comparisons. And that's really not an expert way of looking at it. So when you look, or when I look at the church suspect and we see them walking with their feet pointed out, and then we look at Bobby Henry or at Randy Bevers and we see them walking with their feet turned out, we can't say the walk is exactly like. To us, maybe it is, but there's a lot more with hip motion, with terms that I don't even know what they mean, like drop foot and stuff like that. So much more goes into an expert determination of whether one person walks exactly like another person. So I would encourage you to, when you're looking at someone's comment that says Randy Bevers has got to be the guy who killed Missy because he walks just like the suspect, bring that up with them. Bring up the fact that they're not an expert unless they're a doctor, unless they're a physical therapist, unless they're a podiatrist, unless they have years of experience looking at these kinds of things. We're just not experts. We're just not. It's like, here's a comparison I'll give you. Let's say that I go with a buddy of mine to visit a sick friend who's in the hospital with lung cancer. And he's coughing in his hospital bed quite a bit, and he's got lung cancer, and it's affecting him. He's in late terminal stages. So after visiting, my friend and I then leave, and we're in the car driving to lunch, and my friend coughs a little bit. And I turn and I look at him and I say, "Your cough is exactly like our friend that we just saw. Do you have lung cancer?" And he would laugh me. He would laugh me out of the car. I mean, isn't that absurd? Because we're not experts on coughs. We're not doctors. So if one person coughs and then another person coughs, you know how qualified I am to compare those two coughs? Maybe one is a wet cough. I can tell that there's some liquid, some mucus or whatever, phlegm. And the other person may have a dry, hacking kind of cough. That's really all I can do to compare coughs. And so it'd be ridiculous to, just tell my friend that he has lung cancer just because he happened to cough. All right, it's the same way with the way that the suspect walks and the way that any individual that we see out on the street walk. We can't compare it accurately. And I've got news for you. It is not rare for a person to walk with their feet turned out. And I know it's kind of a challenge in this COVID environment that we're in now, to go and find a crowd of people that are all walking. But if you could, at the supermarket maybe, or at the mall, whatever, go and just watch people. Watch how they walk. And you will find that there are plenty of people out there that walk with their feet turned out. It's just their footage of them has not been associated with the Missy Bevers case, and the only two that have been Bobby Henry and Randy Bevers. I mean, that's really all I can say about that, and I feel like I've talked out myself on the Randy Bevers situation. We are not experts, and we can't say that he walks exactly like the church suspect. Okay, we just can't. But also keep in mind all those other reasons why Randy Bevers has been eliminated by Midlothian police. He's not a suspect. He just isn't. Okay, so that's that part of it. And then on to the next part of the podcast, and the kind of the final thing that I wanted to talk about. And that's about the theory of Missy being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The theory that the killer was not there to kill Missy and was there for some other reason entirely. Okay. So here's the thing I want to talk about with that. And this goes back to day one of the investigation. You know, day one of the investigation, the police chief basically said, yeah, we're investigating it as a burglary. Some people think it's burglary, but, you know, it's kind of an odd time for a burglary to happen. I've never understood that. Never understood that. Why is it an odd time for someone to burglarize any place, whether it's a church or just a business, at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning? That seems to me to be prime time, especially in a rural area. It's raining. You're off the highway. No one can really see inside and see what's going on. 4 o'clock in the morning at a church on a Monday morning seems like prime time to me. I don't know why Chief Carl Smith said that. Okay, a lot of people still dismiss, you know, this whole theory about burglary, about robbery. I want to examine some of the common objections that people bring up to that theory, along with maybe some potential counterpoints to each. Okay, one of the reasons that people bring up to say that this couldn't have been a burglary is they say, in burglaries, the person gets in and out quickly. How many times have you seen or heard someone say that in relation to the Missy Bevers case? A bunch. They don't see this suspect going in and out quickly, and so therefore they think it could not have been a burglary. Well, I mean, I'm sure that there is truth to that about getting in and out quickly when the burglar's uncertain about how much time he has or how secure he believes his environment to be. But what if he thinks he has hours to spare? Again, this person is in a church. He's not expecting anybody to come in and start working, any employees to be there. You know, they were just at church the day before. So on a Monday, probably not before 8 o'clock at the earliest. And he's there at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. He's off the beaten path. It's raining cats and dogs. He's in a rural area. If he has confidence, and I say he, again, this suspect could be female. Let me just say they, okay? I'll say they, and you can make your own judgments about whether the suspect is male or female. If they have confidence that they're not going to be interrupted for hours, then why get in and out quickly? So isn't it possible that this suspect just decided there was no need to rush? And that's why they just kind of were casually going around and not really acting with a sense of urgency. You know, trying to put myself in the position of a suspect. I'm not gonna rush unless I feel like I have to. All right, so let's go into another objection. That objection being the footage doesn't show the suspect taking anything. Okay, true. Well, sort of true. I'll get to that in a minute. We don't see the suspect like gathering up audio equipment or TV monitors or whatever. But just because they haven't found something to take, that doesn't mean that their motive wasn't to try to find something to take originally. Let me give you an example. Let's say you go to Best Buy and you're intending to look at TVs, and maybe buy one. Okay, you browse for a while, but then you walk out empty-handed because you just didn't see anything that met your needs. Okay, if I'm watching surveillance camera footage of you walking around in that store, looking around, and then leaving, would I be correct to assume that your motive was not to buy a TV? Of course not. You walked in very open to the idea of buying a TV. You were shopping for it, and then you just turned around and left because it didn't meet your needs. So we can't assume this suspect never intended to take anything from the church just because they didn't. And by the way, getting back to didn't take anything, there is that mysterious white object at the end of the video that's in the suspect's left hand. I don't know why people don't count that as taking something. That was not in the suspect's hand earlier in the video. And it doesn't appear to be something that would fit in a pocket. So at some point, the suspect picked up that object and wanted to take it with them. Maybe they didn't end up taking it with them. I don't know that they did or didn't. They murdered somebody afterward. So maybe they dropped it and just left it there. But they did have something in their hands, so it's not really correct to say that we don't see them taking anything. We don't know what that white object is for sure, but it's something that was in the suspect's hands. Okay, let's move on to another potential objection that I hear from people about why this could not be a burglary. And that is that the church members say that nothing was missing afterward. Okay, we know from church members nothing was missing afterward. All right, but if that's true, remember that if this were a burglary, it would have been an interrupted burglary because Missy came in. So if you assume that that person did not expect Missy to be there and they were caught by surprise, then we have no way of knowing what the perp's original plans might have been, if not for the interruption by Missy. If they did not feel a sense of urgency, if they weren't in a rush and thought they had plenty of time, maybe they're just going around. Maybe they're just having fun being in a building they're not supposed to be in all by themselves, and they're just scoping everything out. Maybe they really had no idea what was going to be in this building, and so it's a fact-finding mission to see what's there. Not everybody grew up in church. Not everybody knows that churches don't really have a lot of valuable things to take. And hey, maybe this church wasn't even plan A for this suspect. Have you thought about that? Maybe the suspect went to the outdoor store first, thinking about breaking in there, and then decided that that place was too secure, and so they went to the church as plan B. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. That is speculation, but it's a possibility, right? So, if this is an interrupted burglary, whether it was a plan A burglary, plan B burglary, if it's a burglary, it got interrupted because the burglar, in this scenario is still there, and here comes Missy. So again, to my Best Buy analogy, let's say you're looking at TVs and you run into an old friend of yours you haven't seen in a long time. He invites you to go have lunch. The two of you leave the store. Your shopping was interrupted. That doesn't mean that your intentions were not to shop at all. That doesn't mean that your intentions were not to buy a TV. What happened was you were interrupted and you decided to leave. But again, it does not speak to what your original intentions were. Okay? So, the next thing. If the intent was to rob, why did the perp leave Missy's wedding ring on her finger? That is something that Randy Bevers himself brought up. Okay, well, just because Brandon thought about Missy wearing a ring, that doesn't mean that the perp thought of that. Okay? And especially if you are in the heat of the moment in battle against someone that caught you by surprise, that you had no idea that you were going to encounter until you're in the middle of encountering them. At that moment, this person is intent on eliminating that threat. It might not occur to them to take inventory of her valuables. Okay, because she's an X factor that's been introduced into this situation. This person has on their mind, if it's a burglary in this scenario, this person has on their mind, what can I take that's valuable from this church that I'm walking around in? So maybe they're not pivoting just on the spur of the moment to what can I take off the body of this person that I've just killed. You know, and maybe when she fell, maybe she fell to the ground with her hand under her. Maybe this person didn't even see the ring. We don't know. So I think it's kind of a reach to say that because she still had her wedding ring on her finger, that the suspect was not a burglar, because I just don't think it's automatic that a burglar would go and take a ring off somebody's finger after he killed them. I mean, think about all the muggings that have led to the person being killed. Does the mugger always take, if it's a woman, does the mugger take the woman's wedding ring off the finger, or do they just take the purse and go? If it's a man, do they think to take the gold band, wedding band off of his finger, or do they just take his wallet and go? So I think it's a weak argument to say that because Missy still had her wedding ring on, that the suspect must not have been a burglar. Okay, but here's the one I really want to talk about. Here's the objection that I want to get to as the final point here, and that is, nobody robs a church. There's nothing to steal. Okay, well, try telling that to Joel Osteen. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's a well-known minister and author, and his church is Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas. And in the recent past, it was burglarized for more than $500,000. Now, granted, that church is a mega church. They meet in what used to be an NBA arena. Okay? So, a big target. Most church burglaries are not going to net a burglar that much money. Okay? I'll grant you that. But then again, most burglars are not looking for that much money. It's kind of like drug dealing. All right? You've got big-time drug dealers and you've got small-time drug dealers. Same way with burglars. You've got big-time burglars who go for the big, it's not even appropriate to call it a burglary. It's more appropriate to call it a heist because of how much is involved. So this Lakewood Church deal is what I would call a heist. Like if you did a bank or something. But small-time burglars, they're out there too. They're trying to support a drug habit or something along those lines, and so they're out to get whatever they can. That Lakewood burglar struck sometime between the final service Sunday and when an employee discovered the theft Monday morning from the offices. So it's the same time frame as Missy. Sometime between Sunday after the final service and Monday morning when the employees got there. And you have to assume in the Lakewood Church situation that they waited until dark to do the deed. I don't think they would be so brazen as to go there on a Sunday afternoon. So sometime Sunday night, sometime after dark, Sunday night, Monday morning, the same as Creekside. Consider this. What if Lakewood had not kept its Sunday offerings on premises, and yet there was a burglar who assumed incorrectly that they did? Okay, so this burglar is in some sort of disguise because Lakewood has cameras, and he walks around looking for money and not finding it because in this hypothetical scenario, Lakewood, immediately after the service, they take all the checks, all the cash, all the credit card receipts. They take all that off premises. Obviously, they didn't in reality, but let's say that they did. And so this burglar goes around looking for money and doesn't find it. And then in this hypothetical scenario, just like in the Missy Bevers case, let's say the Lakewood burglar encounters a visitor, some church employee who happens to show up. Maybe it's a cleaning crew, whatever. If a murder occurs in that situation, would we see it as a robbery, or would we be convinced that the victim was targeted? Okay, same scenario, hypothetically, as what could have happened with Missy Bevers, with a burglar being there. They're there maybe to look for cash, maybe to look for credit card information so that they could do identity theft or potentially get enough credit card information to do transactions with it. And by the way, the Lakewood heist is just one example of a church being the target of a burglary or a robbery. And again, for those of you who don't know, burglary, robbery, these are legal terms. Usually burglary is attached to theft against a property where nobody's around. So you break into a church and you steal something. That's a burglary. But you break into a bank, or you walk into a bank during business hours and you have a holdup of the people who were there and you take money. That's a robbery because people are involved. You're taking money from people instead of just taking objects or money from a structure. Okay, so again, the Lakewood heist is just one example of a church being the target of a burglary or robbery. This article from 2012 that I'm going to put in the description, a link to, notes the rise in church burglaries amid a culture change in which churches are no longer considered a safe haven. Okay, it was on Fox News from 2012. Churches no longer a sanctuary from crime as burglaries rise is the headline. And indeed, robbery is one of the leading causes of deadly attacks in places of worship in the United States, according to statistics that are compiled by church security specialist Carl Chinn. His last name spelled Chinn, Carl Chinn. This was a guy who, after an incident at Focus on the Family, which is a ministry in Colorado, where he was on site with some other people, and this guy kidnapped them, basically, held them against their will, and everything turned out okay, but Carl Chinn, who was the victim in that case, decided to start compiling statistics. And his statistics aren't just about robberies. They're about DFIs, which are deadly force incidents that happened on church property. And he noted 781 deadly attacks on church property in the 15 years between 1999 and 2014. Okay? And a large number of those, the largest percentage of those deadly force incidents, were robberies. I think it was 26% of deadly force incidents were robberies. And these were on church property. 781 in 15 years. And then get this. Carl Chinn kind of gave his statistics to an organization. He sort of retired from it, and they continued compiling the statistics after 2014, I think from January of 2014 on. And get this. The number rose. It was 781 over 15 years, right? It rose by another 1,000 between 2014 and 2018. So putting that into perspective, it took 15 years to get to roughly 800 deadly force incidents at churches. It took another 4 years to double that number. Think about that. Talk about a rise, not only in burglaries, robberies themselves, but actual deadly force incidents. So I'm going to include in my description here on the podcast or on my channel here, I'm going to include links to the Carl Chinn statistics, and then the organization that took up after he retired from doing it, fbsinamerica.com. I've got a link there. I've got the link to the radio station broadcast about the new person who has been brought in as a consultant to look at the Missy Bevers case. So all that's going to be there for you to take a look at. And in closing, and just to kind of tie a bow on this burglary thing, I'm not trying to convince you that this was without a doubt a burglary. It very well could have been a targeted attack that targeted Missy. I've been saying this all along. But in my opinion, the burglary scenario just doesn't get the consideration that it should be given. Not that I 100% believe it, but we need to have an open mind, and we need to not just totally discount it. Particularly when you consider how long we've gone in this case without a real viable suspect, and how the case appears to be languishing. Well, I say languishing. We obviously have some movement in terms of resources being brought in, but as far as being named as a suspect, as far as any serious new warrants that are going anywhere, the case really hasn't progressed that much. Hopefully something will, now that we have these additional resources, human resources, who are being attached to it. But until things move along, we really need to keep all options on the table. And that includes targeted and untargeted scenarios. Police began in 2016 with the notion that Missy had been in touch with her killer. They zeroed in on family, friends, and co-workers, and they backtracked a month later and said that nobody in those categories was the focus of the investigation any longer. Now, maybe police didn't do a good enough job vetting those people within Missy's sphere of influence. Maybe they jumped onto a suspect and just dropped the ball on some of the other people who were friends or family or co-workers. But maybe, just maybe, and this is the way I'm leaning, all those people that actually knew Missy, maybe, just maybe, they're innocent. And the real killer of Missy Bevers may have been a total stranger. Someone who didn't know her and she didn't know him. And that could help explain why it's been so hard to solve this case. If it's somebody that was a total stranger and that person is good at keeping a secret and doesn't talk, then how are you going to catch them? BTK never said a word to anybody. The Golden State Killer never said a word to anybody. So if this person is a total stranger to Missy with no connection to her whatsoever, that explains why it's hard to solve. But it could also explain motive in terms of burglary. Because just because we think a church isn't a good place to burgle doesn't mean that this person, the suspect, the real person who is seen on video, doesn't mean that they thought that. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they didn't grow up in church. Or maybe they think that everybody pays cash now in their tithes and offerings, and that there was an offering plate somewhere that was just brimming with cash that all they had to do was dip their hand into and stuff it in their pocket. Just because we think in common sense terms, that doesn't mean that criminals always do. So anyway, I will leave you with that, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Gumshoe Stories. Please keep the case alive. Talk amongst yourselves about it. Spread the word that this case is unsolved, and if you have somebody who follows true crime, make sure that that they're familiar with the Missy Bevers case. Maybe we can help crack this thing somehow. Until next time, be nice to one another. We'll talk to you soon.